The last time that I did a monitor review on this channel, it was for a portable monitor, an external monitor that I could take with me so that I could game on my Steam Deck or whatever other handheld when I'm traveling. This time around, we're going to be talking about a stationary desktop monitor. And for lack of a better way of saying this, I've never actually been a fan of curved monitors. I know that there's some people that are out there. One of my best friends, he actually has one, and he's been tooting his horn about how great these are. So when KTC reached out to me, I was a little bit skeptical about whether or not to even, review this monitor. Turns out that I was actually pleasantly surprised. This monitor pretty much encompasses everything that I would want, especially for the price point that this is at, and has all of the bells and whistles that anybody that PC games, seriously, would want to consider for themselves. Full disclosure, KTC is sponsoring this video, and they also gifted me this monitor to keep. This monitor specifically is the KTC H32S25E. And the first thing that I noticed when I unboxed the monitor was the fact that this thing is huge. At 32 inches, it just dwarfs everything else that I have here. Now, I have a 27-inch monitor over here, and I have a 24-inch monitor over here. One's 1440, the other one is 1080. This is just humongous by comparison. Now, the fact that it's 32 inches, technically I measured it out as 31.5 inches, but the fact that it's 32 inches definitely begs to question the PPI, the pixel per inch density that you would get with that 1440p resolution. Initially, I was kind of taken aback because I thought that that was going to be, kind of like this blemish on the overall monitor, because the PPI that you have on here is technically 93.24. And in order to get a good PPI, you would need around 100 to 110 PPI. So I was kind of expecting it to be a poor experience, but when I was gaming on here, when I was editing videos, when I was editing photos, like everything just worked. For those of you that don't know, I edit photos and videos for my day job, so I was using this as my main monitor once I color calibrated it in order to really kind of get a good feel of it. Also, I was playing games on here. Like, I mainly play single player titles. Like, I just finished God of War Ragnarok on PC, and I'm going on to Silent Hill 2, which is honestly amazing so far. If you haven't played Silent Hill 2, I highly recommend it. But that being said, when I was testing everything out, I wasn't really taken aback by the PPI by any means. Everything else that's here is awesome. Yes, you have 1440p. Yes, you have 240 hertz refresh rate, but you also have plenty of other features. You have a 178-degree viewing angle. You have 1000R for the curve that's there. The curve depends on like how far you want it from you and things like that. And the higher the number, the more curved that it is. But at 1000R, it feels good to game on this monitor. On top of that, you are going to have a 122% sRGB color gamut and 99% sRGB color coverage. Now, for me, somebody that works on photos and videos for a living, I was so excited because this is a monitor that has proper color calibration and representation. Now, I leave a huge asterisk on that because when I started actually working on this, I noticed that the colors were a little bit more bluish than I would like. So I actually had to color calibrate it using my Spider 4 Express. It is a little old, but it still does the job in the grand scheme of things. If you're considering getting a color calibration system for yourself, I would recommend one of the ones that I have linked down below, just because it means that you're going to get better colors overall, much better than what you would get straight from the manufacturer. Now, I digress. This is going to have 4000:1 contrast, HDR10 support, and 0.9 millisecond response time. Now, with the millisecond response time, I'm going to go a little bit more in depth later on in the video about this, but keep that in mind, 0.99 milliseconds. This does support FreeSync as well as G-Sync, and this does also have a matte screen surface. So if you have a room that has a lot of lights behind you or anything like that, it won't really impede too much on the screen itself. I say too much because, there are some things that happen, but regardless of that, it's still a pretty positive experience. On top of that, you are going to have a VESA mount compatibility for the monitor itself. This is actually mounted on my 3-arm stand. And then there's also anti-blue light screens. So all of that is packaged into a monitor that is currently listed at the time of this recording at $319 on Amazon, but with a $50 coupon, it knocks down the price to $269, which makes it very competitive in that space, that 1440p 32-inch monitors with 240 hertz refresh rate. This is just something that it kind of hits all of the check boxes that you would want for a monitor that's that size, that price point, and that resolution. It it's honestly a really good Goldilocks zone, so to speak. By the way, if you like what you see, then subscribe down below, hit that little bell icon, and like the video. It helps a ton, guys, more than you know. So thank you guys for that. I appreciate you. Unboxing it was relatively easy. There are a couple of things that I do want to go ahead and mention in terms of everything that's there, but when it comes down to it, you are going to get the actual monitor itself, a power cable and adapter, as well as a DisplayPort 1.4 cable, a little bit of documentation, and some screwdrivers with some included screws for actually mounting the base to the actual stand for the monitor. And I do want to go ahead and say that one of the things that I didn't like about the actual mount or stand that came with the monitor is that you could really only swivel up and down the actual monitor. You couldn't actually increase the height or decrease the height of the monitor. It was essentially stationary. Now, for a monitor that size, I don't think that's going to be that big of a deal, but if you are going to be paying a premium, I would personally want to have that height adjustment that's there. Now, with the 3-arm setup that I do have here in my studio, my bedroom studio, I guess, I can go ahead and kind of like, increase and decrease the actual height. But if you don't have anything like that, then you're kind of just stuck with swiveling up and down, and that's kind of it. There really isn't any other way to adjust the actual position of the monitor with what's included. When it comes to connectivity, there are a couple of options that are there. You have HDMI 2.0 as well as DisplayPort 1.4, and you also have a 3.5mm jack if you want any sort of audio while you're connecting, I don't know, a PS5 or an Xbox or any other system or anything that isn't connected directly to your PC. Now, me personally, I have a very convoluted system in terms of getting audio straight into these headphones that are here. But for a lot of people, if you're going to be connecting any sort of 3.5mm jack, it's typically to the motherboard and not the actual monitor itself. This is just a nice option if you're connecting a system that doesn't have an audio out that is on the system itself, like a console, for instance. But that's besides the point. The 240 hertz refresh rate is limited to only the DisplayPort option. So if you're connecting a PlayStation, for instance, you can only go all the way up to 144 hertz if that were possible on the system, because it's only technically possible to go to 120, but I digress. At the end of the day, if you're connecting an HDMI to this monitor, just know that you'll be limited to only 144 hertz instead of the marketed 240 hertz. That being said, both options still provide that 1440p resolution when it comes to the display itself. It's just, you have two options that are there. One of the things that I wanted to make sure that I tested properly was the input latency on this monitor. Now, I don't know if you know this or not, but a lot of the PC marketing and advertisement that is out there for a lot of the equipment that is out there that you can use to build your rigs, they typically quote the fastest speeds that you can get on something. For example, with SSDs, they will tell you the fastest read and write speeds that you can have on there on the box and in a lot of the marketing. But the thing is that with that, those speeds are peak speeds. They're kind of the outlier speeds. You're only going to see that maybe 1 to 5% of the time whenever you're actually using the device itself or the storage itself. The rest of the time, you're going to see anywhere between 50 to 70% of that actual number. The same thing can be said for monitors and input latency. Now, I used a device called the CSOS-LTT, and this is the open source latency testing tool from a YouTuber called Tech Team GB, which created this, and it's awesome. It's used not only to test latency on the monitor itself, but other devices such as mice and keyboards. Honestly, it's awesome and it's very accurate. The way that this tests is using DirectX to send a frame from the GPU, a white frame from the GPU, onto a black screen. It's then received by this little sensor that's on the actual device, and it does that 100 times per test. The first time that I got the results with this monitor, I was kind of taken aback because it wasn't that 0.99 millisecond response time that you would expect. So I tested it 8 more times before I finally said, you know what, these numbers are kind of more or less in line with what I would expect from this. So now, the fastest speed that I got on this, because it gives you a minimum, a maximum, and an average, the minimum is 0.58 milliseconds, which is much faster than the quoted 0.99 milliseconds that you could get on this monitor. But the maximum, the slowest that we got with it was 6.9 milliseconds. So there's a bit of a gap. In terms of an average on display, though, it's 2.795 milliseconds. Now, this does take the minimum and maximum for USB polling delay, render time, on display display lag and total input lag, and it compiles this all into an actual millisecond response time. The average with the minimums and maximums of everything is 4.97 milliseconds. This takes into account everything that I mentioned just now. So in terms of what you can actually expect, that's pretty much it. Take it or leave it with whatever you'd like, but that's the results that I got from the testing that I did on this. Another thing that I wanted to make sure that I touched upon was actually the brightness of the screen itself and the level of nits that you would expect with using this device. Now, I am here in a room and it's relatively dark just because it's dark outside right now, but there's a window right over here that if I open up, it's just going to let in a ton of light, and it would kind of affect whatever I'm seeing here on screen. I do love the fact that there is kind of like this matte material that's on the screen itself. That way that lighting doesn't really affect too much of what's seen on screen. But regardless, I wanted to test how bright it could get. So I got a lux meter in order to see what that would be, and with that I was able to deduce how much or how many nits I would get on the screen itself. So if I were to have this at 100%, I would get 357.2 lux, which is equal to 819.5 nits. I'm actually going to be rounding up or down just so that there aren't any decimal points, but at 80% brightness you would get 273 lux and 626 nits. 50% brightness would be 193 lux, and that would be 443 nits, and 0% would be 23 lux or 52 nits. Take that as you will, of course, because every room has a different scenario in terms of the lighting that you would get in the ambiance. But when it comes down to it, I don't really have to pump this up past the 50% whenever I'm using it, using HDR. It's just, there's no real need to go past that, especially in the environment that I'm in. And even during daytime, I'm okay. I don't need anything more than that. So if you are in a brightly lit environment, you can game on here and you'll be fine. If you have that HDR set on, like, you really have nothing to worry about. Now, because it does have HDR on the screen, I wanted to test it with some games that had a lot of contrast. One of those was Silent Hill 2. I felt like Silent Hill 2 was just kind of like a perfect, well, recent representation of a game that has a lot of dark environments, and it did not disappoint. In terms of darkness, in not only in the ambiance of the fog that's there, but also in terms of the darkness that you see with things inside or being inside, it's just, not only is it creepy, but it's also just a nice way to see what an HDR monitor can do. Now, obviously, this is not an OLED screen, so you aren't going to get that 100% infinite black that you would get with that type of, well, pixels. But when it comes down to it, this does a relatively good job. And there's, I mean, when you talk about OLED versus LCD, that just opens an entire can of worms because there are both pros and cons on each side of the argument. Personally, downstairs, I have an OLED screen, but up here I have nothing but LCD screens. It's just my own personal choice when it comes to actually creating content or doing work for my day job. It's just a better choice overall, but it's all up to you when it comes to choosing the right monitor for you. Overall, this is a really good monitor for the price after the coupon. At $269, everything that you get for this monitor is definitely well worth it. Not to mention the size that's there. If you are somebody that is into, pixel counting and wants a higher PPI, then this might not be the best choice for you because of that lower PPI in contrast to other units. You might want a smaller screen, something that's like maybe 27 inches or 30 inches if they sell it, just because you want to increase that pixel density that's there. That being said, aside from that, this checks off all the marks. I mean, if you want high refresh rate, it's there. If you want 1440p, which I feel like is a nice medium in terms of 1080 versus 4K, it's just, you get that 2K aspect, and it's enough for me to be satisfied personally. And then on top of that, you have HDR10 support, not to mention all of the other features that are tied into this monitor itself. The color values that are there after color calibration are really good, but in my opinion, it's just a better overall package than some of the other competition that's out there. Again, that being said, with that $50 coupon. After that, at $319, it's kind of, there's other things that are there within that price point that are much more competitive in my opinion, but it really just depends on what you're looking for your own personal setup. All right. What do you guys think of the KTC H32S25E? Is this something that you're going to be getting for yourself? Do you think that this is kind of like this perfect Goldilocks zone in terms of like price to performance, or do you think that it's too expensive for what you get? Do you think it's too cheap for what you get? I love to hear your thoughts on things and everything down below. And if you guys want to hear my thoughts on the Steam Deck controller or the Steam controller that we got from Hori, then click this video over here. And if you want to hear about my thoughts on this amalgamation that is known as the GPD Win Max 2, then click this video over here. And until next time, guys, I will see you on the next one. Peace.